It seems to me that art or that mind responds, it has an affinity for itself, and if it's universal, then it has an affinity for the universal mind. What's interesting about the example of the kaleidoscope is it's boring after a few minutes. We all agree on that. If you analyze how it works and take it apart, the base units in most kaleidoscopes are pieces of broken glass, pebbles, things like this, detritus, junk. And somehow splitting this into 6 sections with a mirror and putting it in heavy oil is supposed to bring you to the realm of something watchable and interesting, but it isn't. The brain machines being produced in Germany are the same way. All pattern seems to quickly lose its charm unless it's pattern that has been put through the sieve of mind, any mind, so that we enjoy looking at ruins and the artifacts of vanished civilizations a lot more than random arrangements of natural objects. So it seems to me what we're looking for when we say it's like a DMT trip, the MPPI data on chaos, then what we're saying is, aha, here in this pattern there is the footprint of meaning. It's as though an architect passed through here, and so we can appreciate it. So we're always looking for the betraying presence of an order that is more than an order of, I don't know even how to say it, economy, I guess. We look for an aesthetic order. And when we find that, then we have this reciprocal sense of recognition and transcendence. And this is what the psychedelic experience provides in spades. Now, a critic of the psychedelic experience would object, of course it's made of mind. It's made of your mind. But for the psychedelic voyager, this does not seem to be obvious. The intuition is, it is made of mind, but it is not made of my mind. So then either there's an identity problem or a real frontier of communication is being crossed. But I think when we say we look for living pattern or aesthetically satisfying order, what we really mean is we look for the sign that mind has somehow touched the stochastic processes of nature. I agree. I think you're right that seeing language, I regard language as some kind of project that is uncompleted as we sit here, that it isn't the transfer of thought and intention into speech. That doesn't do it. I mean, clearly, the whole world is held together by small mouth noises, and it's only barely held together by small mouth noises. If we could have a tighter network of communication, we would, in a sense, be a less diffuse species. Communication, the lack of it, is what's shoving us over the brink into possible planetary catastrophe. So making language more explicit through visualization seems a natural step to take, and it seems to me an inevitable step to take once you have the psychedelic experience, because then you see that if you buy into the idea that psychedelics somehow are showing you the evolutionary path yet to be followed, then it seems obvious that what it entails is a further completion of the project of language. Maybe what all this technology is about is actually a more explicit condensation of the word. I mean, it is interesting that modernity is characterized by an ever more explicit evocation of the image. I I mean, you just have to go back 100 years, and the best anything could do was an albumin tint photograph. Now we have, color lithography, HD TV, high-speed printing, virtual reality. It's as though, language is becoming, the word is becoming flesh, and condensing into the visual realm would make it, would be almost a kind of telepathy compared to the kind of linguistic reality we're living in now. I mean,
glad to hear it.
Yeah, no argument on that. I think that there's been actually a huge amount of discussion about this difference between so-called print linear cultures and oral Aboriginal cultures. This is what McLuhan's whole work was about, and saying that somehow the symbolic signification of language, first through writing and then through printing, has created, has had all kinds of effects on the evolution of the Western mind that we, until McLuhan, were totally unaware of. I mean, he believes that the linear, uniform quality of print creates the intellectual preconditions for the acceptance of an idea like democracy, that you would never get that notion. The Greeks invented it. They had a phonetic alphabet. Modern industrial methods of production based on interchangeable parts. He felt that was inconceivable except by a print culture that had the notion of movable type. The idea of the citizen is a uniformitarian impulse laid over the biological diversity of our individuality that could never have occurred in a culture without print. So the bottom line in the McLuhanist analysis is that we tend to be incredibly naive about the information processing technologies we put in place, because all we care about is input and output, and what we don't understand is it's the plumbing that there's between the input and the output that gives a culture its whole tone, its values, its implicit political assumptions, its attitude toward nature, so forth and so on. And that what we are is a print culture, linear, hierarchical.
What we were.
What we were, yes. We're undergoing a transition in the 20th century. But the intellectuals, unfortunately, at the top of the pyramid are the last to get the news. I mean, they're still poring over Locke and Hegel when, what's really happening is Guns N' Roses and Nirvana. And I don't mean the Buddhist state of transcendence. So culture tends to be ruled by the people who are the last to get the news in terms of new technologies which are reshaping the culture. Like, I think all this beefing about the death of literacy, you might as well beef about the passing of the high-button shoe or the beaver hat. I mean, literacy is finished. It was a phase. It's not to be preserved by anyone other than curators. The rest of us are going to live, obviously, in a culture shaped by new forms of media.
We haven't given up writing books ourselves, have we?
Well, I think we're reactionaries, in truth. It's the drugs we extol that get us called modern, or postmodern. The thing is, you can't underestimate the perversity of people in terms of their tendency to prefer this passive thing. I remember in 1977 when I bought my first home computer, you got a manual with it called Basic. And the intent of this manual was to teach you how to program your computer. Well, 6 months of trying to peddle that to the American public, and they realized they had to completely rethink the product, that only a vanishingly small number of people were ever going to program a computer. It's like when you used to buy an automobile and you got a toolbox with it. Well, that's not been true since the 20s. So there's a certain responsibility on the consumer not to demand the prepackaged stuff. It's the MPPI, these big machines are, to my mind, like the psychedelic drug state, but then everybody's trip is like the software they bring to it and run. And someone who goes to the MPPI machine to keep track of their recipes is essentially trivializing it because they don't know what it could do. This is probably the equivalent of going to a psychedelic drug to solve your relationship problems. It's that the question you framed was so stupid and mini-minded, and perhaps the drug, the psychedelic, can help, but what a tremendous misappropriation of its
Well, every
power.
tool will be misused as well as used, will be misused more than it's used. And the most popular books are cookbooks, and nevertheless we write books. And to some little extent, they participate in the evolution of history. The fact that most books are used for recipes doesn't totally destroy all value of books. And so it is with the new media, whereas most people will use them to hypercard stack of recipes or sex postures or something. There will still be a lot of arcane and important material available in this medium which can't be accessed any other way.
Language would become a much more accessible object for study if it were visually explicit, and I expect that this is happening. So it seems to me it's just a new frontier in natural history. It's this most complex and least understood of all behaviors, which is language. And while the instrumentalities may be computers, high-speed imaging, and so forth, it's no more than using the Hubble telescope or something like that to tease data out of a very distant part of the universe and then make it explicit. And if we could understand language, we would understand something about our own place in nature that eludes us, because it's clearly the most complex thing we do, and we're the most complex thing we know, and the feedback from it is culture, the most anomalous phenomenon in the natural world.